Hey guys, so I've done a number of videos where I discuss property sourcing. As I explained in previous videos, there's a concept in America referred to as wholesaling. So it's a very similar concept that developed here. But I did explain some of the dangers behind sourcing properties in South Africa and some of the minimum requirements that a person needs to comply with. So please have a look at these videos on my YouTube page, and these would give you those answers. They typically would answer those questions for you. But now to start getting into more particulars or more detail. I'd like to just briefly address the contrast differences between sourcing a property and doing a back-to-back transaction, right? Now, if you've watched my videos, you'll see what I meant by sourcing. And just touching on it briefly here, what I'm referring to is brokering a property deal. So one would typically approach a seller. You would negotiate with the seller, sometimes even make offers to the seller, and then you would go out to market and you would try and find a purchaser to take over the deal from you. So your intention was never really to buy the property when you're sourcing it. Your intention was always to try and find somebody else to take over that deal. And in the US context, it's referred to as assignment because you give your rights over to somebody else and they step in as purchasers, right? So this is when we refer to sourcing. And as explained in my previous videos, the downside to sourcing properties is because you're acting as an estate agent. Effectively, one may consider you, an estate agent, needing to register with the EAAB, which obviously carries with it some prerequisites that are time consuming and some training that you'd need to undertake. Unfortunately, if you don't comply with these rules and regulations, you may be committing a criminal offense. And unfortunately, you may also be subject to civil liability where people may either refuse to pay you commission or may, in future, when the Property Practitioners Act that comes into force, or the regulations come into force, they may very well also claim a refund of the commission. So what is a back-to-back transaction in contrast to sourcing? Back-to-back transaction has nothing to do with sourcing. It might mimic the process, but in law it is materially different because you're buying a property, so your intention is to buy. So you remain the purchaser and you find someone to sell it to. So effectively, two transactions take place. There's a buy and sell into your name and a buy and sell into another person's name. That's two transactions. So that is totally legitimate because at the end of the day, you're following two sale agreements. Now, the downside to this is that you don't typically charge a commission for this type of transaction. You would make your money in the difference in the purchase price. That would be your profit. So if you buy at 1 million and you sell at 1.3 million, your profit would be within that 300,000, obviously after expenses and holding costs and the like. So that's how the calculation typically happens. It's not a fee or service, it's an actual income that you're deriving from buying a capital asset and selling that asset. Now, obviously, typically there's certain income tax implications, but I wouldn't worry too much about those right now because there's always going to be tax implications on the income you get from either sourcing or back-to-back. So I'm not too worried about that. The main issues is that you'd have to pay double transfer costs. Now, when I say transfer costs, I'm referring to both the attorney costs and transfer duty that's paid to SARS. Now, because these are two transactions, you may find that you need to pay the conveyances for the first transaction and SARS, and again you pay a conveyancer and SARS for the second transaction. And this is sometimes where it's not cost effective to do a back-to-back. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. My advice is if this falls below the threshold of the transfer duty threshold, then you're good to go. You may very well be able to do a back-to-back transaction, and you'll more often than not find that conveyancers will be willing to negotiate with you on pricing to make it effective, because it is one transaction. It is basically one set of transacting parties that they're dealing with. So there are ways to get around the high cost if it's under the transfer duty threshold of R1,000,000. If it's over that, unfortunately, there you might need to pay SARS twice, and that's what you would need to look out for and factor into your calculations. Thank you.